à-bas-le-ciel.
The first thought that comes to mind in connection to Gary Yourovsky, now at the time of his final retirement from the movement, is a quote from Ed Lover. Ed Lover is a radio personality, TV talk show host, that kind of guy in the hip-hop and rap demi-monde. And I remember Ed Lover commenting on a failed political movement in New York City, political movement that was on the ballot, formal electoral politics and lobbying, political movement called The Rent is Too Damn High. You can tell from the name of the political party exactly what they're about. And anyone watching this, if you're really from Manhattan Island, if you grew up downtown New York City, I think you will have heard of this. It was sort of locally famous and infamous. This political movement based around the complaint that the rent is too damn high. Anyway, Ed Lover, in passing judgment on this group, he was saying some amusing things about the highly eccentric, seemingly insane leader of the group. And he said, look, it's a beautiful message, but you are not the guy to deliver it. It just stuck with me, the simplicity of that, where he said, look, this is an important political message. Somebody should organize a political movement to complain about the rent, try to do something about the rent being too high in New York City. But you aren't the guy to do it. And, and looking at Gary Yourovsky in a nutshell, all I have to say is, sure, it's a beautiful message. It's a message I care about. It's a message I'm coming on YouTube every day and talking about. Gary Yourovsky was not the guy to deliver it.
This is what I think should happen to rapists. Even somebody who rapes a woman in a fur coat, if that ever happens. I think that his penis and his balls should be seared off with a cuticle remover, slowly. Then I think 2 skewers should be shoved into their eye sockets. It's going to be in the very near future that somebody busts into a slaughterhouse or a vivisection lab with guns, and they tell the slaughterhouse workers, you take those knives off those pigs' throats right now, or I'm going to shoot you.
I have prior videos on this channel criticizing his endorsement of violence. He did believe in breaking and entering, in the use of violence against property. And I have a video very thoroughly castigating that and explaining exactly why that's wrong and why you actually can't separate violence against property from violence against persons. That's why break and enter crimes often end up in murder and assault and what have you. The thieves may have just been planning to commit a crime against property, but things don't go as planned.
There are certain groups of individuals who will not listen to reason, and for that, you need violence. We're the defenders. You might want to call it violence, but hey, you're bringing it on yourself.
I've met vegans face-to-face who glamorize the idea of people being put in prison, who think there's something heroic or wonderful about vegans going to prison for this type of violent activism. If vegans are known primarily for standing up in a restaurant and screaming hysterically at strangers and breaking down weeping and screaming it's not food, it's violence, yes, that discredits veganism. Guess what? Violence much more profoundly discredits veganism. It discredits Gary Yourovsky as an individual. It discredits any organization he's a member of, any organization he's a leader of. It discredits veganism as an ideal. And that's a damn shame. And I have another video, at the opposite extreme, I suppose, talking about his frankly insane views on insects and how vegans should never kill insects. It's the sort of thing, if you're not really paying attention, on the surface it seems to make sense, it seems very well and good. Take it apart, think about the implications, it gets troubling. I forget if I did a third or a fourth about Yourovsky. You can search channel history and see what else I've done.
You take those knives off those pigs' throats right now, or I'm going to shoot you.
This is a man who wasn't merely factually wrong. This is a man who was deeply morally and ethically wrong, and was really the wrong person to play the role that he ended up playing for the movement. And we saw that in 1,000 examples, him screaming at journalists on Israeli television, the embarrassing statements about everything from rape to the Israeli-Palestine conflict, his, professed hatred for all of humanity, misanthropism. I can't even really say he's a normal, conventional misanthrope. Again, his own criminal history, and then the criminal tactics he endorsed and supported for the movement. And now with his farewell message, we're reminded one trait in his character. He was the kind of guy, it was never enough for him to be right. He also had to show that everyone else was wrong. He's complaining that the reason why he's quit, the reason why he's giving up, is not because it's so tough to talk to mediators, not that it's tough to talk to, his opponents, but because he can't stand dealing with his fellow vegans. He says it's 1,000 times worse dealing with other vegans, dealing with apologist vegans, pacifist vegans, and intersectionalist vegans. That's 1,000 times more draining than dealing with carnists, i.e. Meat eaters. He complains their idea of activism is attacking anyone who doesn't worship at the altar of humanity, especially if they refuse to do yoga sun salutes on a beach before exchanging energy hugs with unbathed hippies in a Woodstock-like drum circle gathering of uselessness. So look, his burnout reflects pretty much all the issues I've been talking about on this channel, even in the last few months. Going way back, I have a video that I still think is important and worth watching, talking about how to not get burnt out in these conversations. Videos in the last few days have really talked about these issues. I'll just interrupt myself to add, this is really, really comparable to what I had to say about Freely. Freely, the banana girl, described herself as the most effective vegan activist in the world. And then I asked the question, well, if what you were doing was so effective, why did you burn out? Why did you quit? Big question. I can give the link to that video below. There's another really useful video I made over a year ago. I'll provide the link in the description below, where the title is Don't Debate the Details. And it really tackles the issue of vegans getting burnt out, because many of them deal with every social interaction, every dialogue, as if it is activism, as if it is an occasion for preaching, and not for listening to the other person's point of view and understanding their motivations, and not for communicating your own motivations. I talk about that, the difference between communicating facts and communicating what my motivations are, why this matters to me. Really useful video, and where I am talking about exactly the problem that's both implicit and explicit in this retirement announcement from Gary Yourovsky, the problem of vegans obsessing over email or Facebook comments or even face-to-face conversations this way, having a kind of misplaced passion, and then that leading to burnout. So that video is a practical guide to how to avoid burnout. And as I say, the open reproach I gave to Freely, I might as well here give to Yourovsky also. Well, Yourovsky, if you believe in this method, if you believe this is working, why are you broken? This is a kind of a pattern I've seen again and again. People have expectations of the community. The community doesn't live up to those expectations, and they drop out. That in my very first video about veganism on this channel, not the first video ever, I talked about exactly that danger. And, I addressed comments to Joe Vegan very much along these same lines. Of any other social movement, you tell me, who has suffered less? This is a tremendously bitter tirade against his fellow vegans, not against meat eaters, not against the establishment. He starts by saying he's burnt out, comparable to a professional athlete like Michael Jordan. Well, no, it's not comparable, is it? What you do is communicating political ideas, first and foremost. And then, if you had any human decency, you'd also be listening to and responding to other people's political ideas. You'd also be doing something constructive to build the movement. He doesn't do that. Really, he narrows his idea of activism is just broadcasting. It's a one-way process of communicating political ideas that he has and everyone else is wrong. He doesn't form any coalitions with anyone. He doesn't cooperate with anyone. That's it. It's a one-man show. So his vision of activism is closer to stand-up comedy. And he was very successful at it. He's been the most successful guy at it in his generation, I think. He was on the road from 2002 to 2014 for 7.5 months a year, traveling to 30 states, giving 2,660 lectures in total, including 186 schools. Generous donors paid his bills, paying for his travel expenses. You're complaining? Really? I mean, again, look at any other social movement in the history of the world, any other political movement, even artistic movements. My dude, you probably had to sleep in a bunch of Howard Johnson hotels, while other rebel leaders had to sleep in caves. You know what I mean? You didn't have to camp out in the forest. You didn't have to sleep in a tent. Maybe you did for fun. But I mean, when you look at the history of struggle for the emancipation of slavery, struggle for civil rights, equal rights, women's rights, struggle of, any example, struggle for gay rights. Who has suffered less?
Revolutionaries throughout history were all crazy. Crazy enough to fight the system, to stand up in a court of law and not apologize for breaking the law, to go up against cops, judges, politicians, society in general. And if you want to say that, well, you still support violence, I've never denied that I support violence.
How is it possible to be so fatuous, so self-indulgent, and so self-pitying, while at the same time lashing out with bitterness against your fellow vegans because they are, he complains, a bunch of pacifist hippies in a drum circle like Woodstock? Yeah, well, look, Gary, in case you can't guess from the cactus in the background, I'm not a hippie myself. In case you can't guess from the constant references to rap music, even within this video, I'm not a hippie myself. However, if I had to choose sides, Gary, between the vegans who subscribe to nonviolence and the vegans like yourself, who not only subscribe to and preach and practice violent methods and go to prison for violent methods and propound that violence, illegal use of force, breaking and entering, etc., that violence is acceptable and is praiseworthy. If I had to choose sides, I'm with the hippies, And there are a lot of reasons for that, including just the virtue of long-term thinking. I've said many times before on this channel, at some point, short-term thinking starts to resemble evil. And, if you're only thinking about your next YouTube video or your next 6 hours of answering emails, which I think is how he really was living the last couple of years, just sending back and forth all these emails, or you're just thinking about your next gig on this touring circuit, you're probably not taking a step back to ask, where is this going to put me? Where is this going to put us 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And I got to tell you, that long-term view, it means a lot more than just staying out of prison. The violent and illegal methods of activism, I think there are short-term arguments in their favor, but they really fall apart when you look at the long term. And you, Gary, you fell apart over the long term. You yourself are living proof that your philosophy doesn't work. You are living proof that your philosophy drove you mad. That's what you say. That you've lost your mind. You've gotten worn out and broken mentally and emotionally from your philosophy and your praxis. Okay? To quote Marcus Aurelius, we are not debating for any ordinary prize. We are debating for whether we are to be sane or insane. Okay? We need to have a philosophy that we can live with, that's productive for us privately and publicly, and that also puts us in a political position where we can win. And you know what my problem with your political philosophy is, Gary, is that it's for losers. And if you're a self-pitying loser who really wants to feel that you're better than everyone else while spending 10 years of your life in a jail cell, this is the philosophy for you. But that's not the philosophy for me. And it's not going to be the philosophy for the people who actually build the future of this movement. So yeah, it's a goddamn shame that of all the people who could have ended up selected almost at random to be in this leadership position. Because, the internet makes people famous in an almost random method. It's a goddamn shame that it was you, Gary. Because it's a beautiful message, but you are not the guy to deliver it.
À-bas-le-ciel.